Across the Atlantic, the meeting that changed everything. The Commission's first stop is Curtiss-Wright Corporation, makers of the P-40 Warhawk, one of America's few modern fighters. The British had already been flying the P-40 under the name Tomahawk, but they wanted more, faster, longer range, and capable at high altitude. However, Curtiss is swamped with orders. Production lines are full. The British would have to wait months, time they simply don't have. Then someone mentions a relatively young company based in Inglewood, California, North American Aviation. Founded in 1933, North American had built trainers like the BT-9 and the AT-6 Texan, sturdy, well-loved machines used to train Allied pilots. They had never designed a frontline fighter, not once. But when the British approached them in early 1940 with a proposal, license build the P-40, North American's president, James Dutch Kindleberger, made a daring offer that would change history. He looked the British delegation in the eye and said, "We can design and build you a completely new fighter, better than the P-40, and have it flying in 120 days. A stunned silence followed. It was an outrageous promise. No one designed an entirely new combat aircraft from scratch that fast. Not in wartime, not ever. But the RAF was desperate, and Kindleberger's quiet confidence carried weight. On April 10, 1940, a contract was signed for 320 aircraft, even though not a single blueprint existed yet. The 120-day miracle. Kindleberger immediately turned to his chief designer, a German-born engineer named Edgar Schmude, a perfectionist, visionary, and aerodynamic genius. Schmude had fled Nazi Germany years before, disgusted by its militarism. Ironically, it would be his engineering brilliance that helped bring Hitler's Air Force to its knees. Schmude's philosophy was simple. If it looks right, it will fly right. He designed an aircraft that looked like nothing else in the sky, sleek, narrow, elegant, and fast. The wing was revolutionary. Instead of a conventional curved surface, Schmude used a laminar flow airfoil, a cutting-edge design that kept airflow smooth and reduced drag dramatically. It allowed the aircraft to fly faster and farther using the same amount of power. Under the belly, he placed a large, carefully shaped ventral radiator scoop, not just for cooling, but for something more ingenious. At high speed, the airflow through the duct actually produced a small amount of jet-like thrust, effectively giving the plane a free boost in performance. No one had ever done that before. Inside, the cockpit was clean, simple, and designed for pilot visibility, something RAF veterans had begged for. Schmude ensured the canopy offered wide vision on all sides, crucial in the lethal chaos of dogfights. Every night, teams of draftsmen hunched over drawing boards under fluorescent lamps. Engineers slept in offices, mechanics in hangars. They worked with a sense of purpose rarely seen because they knew Britain's survival might depend on them. The first prototype, NA-73X. By September 9, 1940, the prototype was complete, a mere 102 days after work began. They called it the NA-73X. It was compact yet powerful, its aluminum skin gleaming in the California sun. Under the hood sat the Allison VI 1710 engine, the same power plant used in the P-40 Warhawk. Reliable, strong, but not ideal for high altitudes. Still, it was what they had. On October 26, 1940, at Mines Field, now Los Angeles International Airport, test pilot Vance Breese climbed into the cockpit for the aircraft's maiden flight. He throttled forward. The Allison roared to life, and the Mustang, still unnamed, rolled down the runway. At 130 miles per hour, it lifted gracefully into the air. Breese later said, "From the moment the wheels left the ground, I knew this was something special." It was stable, responsive, an aircraft that wanted to fly. The NA-73X handled like no other American fighter of its time. It could dive faster than a P-40, turn tighter than a Spitfire, and its range was astonishing. The design was a masterpiece. But there was a catch: the engine. Above 15,000 feet, the Allison began to gasp. It lost power rapidly, limiting its use in high-altitude combat, exactly where bomber escort missions were needed most. The British, nonetheless, were impressed. They ordered more. The aircraft was officially designated the Mustang Mark I. Its first combat missions would be low-altitude reconnaissance and ground attack, roles in which it excelled. RAF pilots soon praised its range, speed, and incredible stability. But the aircraft's full potential was still locked away, waiting for the right key. That key would come from an unlikely partnership, a British engine that would transform the Mustang from promising experiment to the greatest fighter of World War II, the spark before the fire. In 1941, as the U.S. prepared to enter the war, only a few knew what was brewing in the hangars of North American aviation. Engineers continued to refine the design. They didn't know it yet, but their creation would soon escort bombers over Berlin, dual Messerschmitts over France, and carve its name into aviation immortality. The P-51 Mustang was not born from triumph. It was born from desperation, from sleepless nights, and from an audacious promise that should have been impossible. And yet, somehow, it happened. A young American company, a handful of engineers, and a nation not yet at war had created the foundation of the most legendary fighter in history. The skies would soon have a new ruler. The legend had begun. California, October 26, 1940. The dawn of a new sky. It was a clear, crisp morning over Mines Field, Los Angeles, the same stretch of tarmac that decades later would become LAX. The Pacific wind carried the faint scent of fuel and hot aluminum as North American Aviation's engineers gathered near the edge of the runway. After 6 months of sleepless nights and tireless labor, the day had finally come. Parked before them stood a sleek silver machine unlike anything else on the planet. Its fuselage glinted like a blade under the sun. Its wings, long and gracefully tapered, seemed poised to leap from the earth. On its nose, the name was simple: NA-73 AGS, the prototype of what would soon be known to history as the P-51 Mustang. Inside the cockpit sat Vance Breese, a test pilot with nerves of steel. He wasn't one for speeches or ceremony. He had flown everything from experimental bombers to racing planes, and he knew instinctively that this aircraft was something different. Behind him, in the control truck, stood James Dutch Kindleberger, North American's president, and Edgar Schmood, the German-born chief designer. Schmood clutched a clipboard, his knuckles white. He had designed hundreds of aircraft parts in his life, but this was the first time he was watching his own creation come alive. The engine stirs. At 8:30 a.m., Breese flicked the ignition. The Allison V1710 engine coughed, sputtered once, then roared to life. A wave of hot exhaust rippled behind the Mustang, and the ground crew instinctively stepped back. The propeller spun into a blur, kicking up dust and the sweet scent of high-octane fuel. Schmood and Kindleberger exchanged a tense glance. Months of calculations, late-night design changes, and corporate risk all led to this moment. If the plane failed now, North American's reputation, and perhaps its future, could crumble. But the Mustang didn't fail. It rolled forward, picking up speed, 50 miles an hour, then 80. The wheels rattled against the concrete. The airframe trembled with life. At 130 miles per hour, Breese gently pulled the control stick back. The silver aircraft lifted cleanly from the runway, rising into the blue Californian sky. The crowd on the ground broke into applause. It had flown on the very first attempt, a new kind of fighter. Breese leveled off at 2,000 feet, testing the controls. The Mustang responded instantly, smooth, stable, and perfectly balanced. The laminar flow wings sliced through the air like a knife through silk. Test observers below could see the aircraft dart and bank effortlessly. Breese later recalled, "From the moment I took her off the ground, she felt right. Solid, responsive, and light on the stick." For a full 20 minutes, Breese danced with the wind. The aircraft handled like a sports car, agile and fast, yet incredibly stable. When he landed, he stepped out grinning, his flight suit streaked with oil, and he said simply, "Gentlemen, you've built yourself a winner." It was the kind of praise engineers live for, the promise and the problem. The NA-73X was fast, faster than any American fighter of its day. In level flight, it could reach 382 miles per hour at low altitude, outrunning the P-40 and even the British Spitfire in certain conditions. But as the test flights continued, a troubling truth emerged. At altitudes above 15,000 feet, where bomber formations typically flew, the Allison engine began to struggle. It wasn't the airframe. The design was magnificent. It was the power plant. The Allison V1710 lacked a two-stage supercharger, the device that forced extra air into the engine at high altitudes. Without it, the Mustang gasped for breath as the air thinned. For low-level missions, the plane was extraordinary, its range, maneuverability, and speed unmatched. But at high altitude, where the Luftwaffe's Messerschmitt Bf-109s hunted bombers, it was out of its element. The British loved the plane's handling, but were disappointed by its ceiling. The Mustang would have to prove itself in a different kind of war. Down low, where trees blurred past and the ground rushed beneath its wings. Early trials and hidden potential. In November 1940, the second prototype took to the air. Over the next few months, engineers fine-tuned the cooling system, adjusted the wings, and refined the cockpit layout. The aircraft continued to impress. The British were so intrigued that they placed an order for 620 more units, naming it the Mustang Mky. It entered production before America itself had even entered the war. By early 1941, the first Mustangs were being shipped across the Atlantic, their silver skins wrapped in tarpaulin, destined for the Royal Air Force. When British pilots finally tested it in combat, they were astonished by its speed at low altitude and its ability to range deep into enemy territory. The Mustang could fly 200 miles farther than a Spitfire and still fight. Its long legs would soon make it indispensable, but not yet perfect. Because perfection required a heart transplant, an engine worthy of its airframe, the waiting legend. By late 1941, as the United States entered the war after Pearl Harbor, the Mustang remained a specialist aircraft. Fast and efficient, but underpowered where it mattered most. Engineers at North American knew they were sitting on something extraordinary, something that only needed the right spark to unleash its full potential. That spark was waiting in England, in the form of a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the same powerhouse that roared inside the legendary Spitfire. Soon, that British heart would meet American bones, and the world would meet the true P-51 Mustang, the plane that would dominate the skies from Normandy to Berlin. But for now, in October 1940, none of that was certain. All anyone knew was that a new kind of fighter had taken flight. A machine so smooth, so fast, so elegant, it felt like it was born from the sky itself. The legend had lifted off the ground. England, 1942, a fighter with a flaw. By 1942, the P-51 Mustang had already earned a quiet reputation among British pilots. It was fast, graceful, and had a range that could outfly almost anything in the Allied inventory. On low-level reconnaissance runs and strafing missions, it was a dream, cutting across the French countryside like a silver blade. But the higher it climbed, the weaker it became. At 20,000 feet, its Allison V1710 engine gasped for air. The supercharger simply couldn't feed the cylinders with enough oxygen. At those altitudes, the Luftwaffe ruled supreme. German Bf-109s and FW-19s 0S dove out of the sun, their Daimler-Benz engines howling, while the Mustang's Allison choked in the thin air. It was heartbreaking. The airframe was perfect, the design ahead of its time. But the engine was holding it back. Engineers on both sides of the Atlantic knew it. The Mustang wasn't yet the legend it would become. Not until a group of daring engineers decided to commit what some at the time called mechanical heresy, a British experiment. The idea was simple and revolutionary. If the Allison engine couldn't perform at high altitudes, why not replace it with an engine that could? The British had just the candidate, the Rolls-Royce Merlin, a 27-liter, liquid-cooled, supercharged V12 engine, the beating heart of the Spitfire and the Lancaster bomber. The Merlin was already a proven miracle of engineering. Its two-stage, two-speed supercharger allowed it to breathe at extreme altitudes, maintaining power where other engines suffocated. At Rolls-Royce's facility in Hucknall, England, a small team of experimental engineers, and by Ronald Harker, a test pilot and technical officer, proposed the unthinkable. Take an American Mustang and fit it with a British Merlin. In a 1942 report, Harker wrote simply, "The Mustang is the best aeroplane we've seen from America, if only it had a Merlin engine." It was the sentence that would rewrite aviation history. Operation Heart Transplant. That summer, several Mustangs were pulled from RAF service and delivered to Rolls-Royce for experimentation. Engineers carefully removed the Allison engines and began the delicate task of adapting the airframe to fit the Merlin 61, the same engine that powered late-model Spitfires. The modification wasn't simple. The Merlin required new coolant lines, new mounting structures, and adjustments to the cowling and air scoop. But the Mustang's design remarkably accommodated the changes beautifully. It was as if the aircraft had been waiting for this engine all along. The first of these hybrids, designated Mustang X, took flight in October 1942. The results were nothing short of astonishing. The Merlin-powered Mustang could climb faster than a Spitfire, reach speeds of over 440 miles per hour, and cruise comfortably at altitudes above 35,000 feet. For the first time, the Mustang could meet German fighters on equal or superior terms. Ronald Harker himself took it for a flight and returned wide-eyed. "The performance," he wrote, "is simply spectacular. This is a world beater, the American response." News of the experiment quickly reached North American aviation and the U.S. Army Air Forces. They were intrigued, and more than a little embarrassed that the British had beaten them to the idea. Within weeks, the Americans began their own engine swap program. At Inglewood, engineers fitted the Packard-built Merlin WW2 1650-3, an American-produced version of the Rolls-Royce engine, into the Mustang's frame. The U.S. factory redesignated the new variant the P-51B and P-51C, depending on which plant it came from. When the first test flights took place in California, the transformation was confirmed. The Mustang wasn't just improved, but it was reborn. It could now climb to 30,000 feet with ease, maintain top speed at altitude, and cover a range of nearly 1,600 miles with drop tanks. It was faster than the Spitfire, longer range than the Thunderbolt, and deadlier than anything the Luftwaffe had in the air. A new ruler of the skies had arrived. The new king takes the throne. By early 1943, the first Merlin-powered Mustangs were rolling off the production line. The RAF received them as the Mustang Mk3, and the U.S. 8th Air Force began fielding them in Europe. When pilots strapped into the new P-51 for the first time, the difference was immediate. Climb rate doubled. Top speed jumped past 440 miles per hour. Fuel efficiency meant it could escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. One American pilot later said, "It could fly like an angel, fight like a devil, and bring you home when others couldn't." With the Merlin engine roaring beneath its cowl, the Mustang finally had both the muscle and the heart to match its perfect frame. It wasn't just a fighter anymore, it was a symbol of Allied unity, a literal fusion of American innovation and British engineering genius. The perfect union. The transformation of the P-51 Mustang was more than a mechanical upgrade. It was an alliance forged in steel and fire. A British engine beating inside an American airframe, piloted by men from every corner of the Allied world, soaring over a Europe fighting for its life. When the Merlin met the Mustang, history changed course. The Luftwaffe's days of dominance were numbered. The once invincible skies over Germany were about to be challenged, and soon conquered, by a machine born of two nations, perfected by necessity and destined for immortality. The skies had a new king, and its name was P-51 Mustang. Winter 1943. Every day, waves of B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators roared across the English Channel, headed straight into the heart of Nazi Germany. Their mission: cripple the Reich's war machine. But it came at a staggering cost. The Luftwaffe ruled the skies, and without escort fighters that could go the distance, the bombers were easy prey. At first, P-47 Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings tried to protect them, but their range fell short. Beyond the Rhine, bomber crews were on their own, surrounded by Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs. Entire formations vanished in fire and smoke before ever reaching their targets. Morale plummeted. Commanders feared the daylight bombing campaign might collapse entirely. Then came the Mustang. Equipped with a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine and fitted with extra fuel tanks, the P-51 could do what no other fighter had done before: escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. It wasn't just fast and agile, it had the stamina to go the distance. For the first time, American bombers had a constant guardian, a fighter that could fight deep in enemy territory and still bring its pilot home. "Little friends, where are you?" came the desperate calls over the radio as formations neared their targets. And then slicing through the clouds, the silver shapes appeared, sleek, lethal, and confident. "Hello, bombers. We're with you now." The tide began to turn. Luftwaffe pilots who once hunted freely now found themselves hunted in return. P-51s chased them back to their airfields, strafing runways and destroying aircraft on the ground. With every sortie, the Allies pushed deeper, closer to the Reich's heart. From the skies over Normandy to the smoking ruins of Berlin, the Mustang carved its legacy, not just as a fighter, but as the savior of the strategic bombing campaign. The little friend had grown into a relentless predator, and the road to Berlin would now be paved with its contrails. By 1944, the skies above Europe belonged to a new predator, the P-51 Mustang. Its long, elegant fuselage gleamed in the sun, its engine's roar striking both awe and terror. Armed with 6.50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, the Mustang was a flying arsenal capable of shredding enemy fighters in seconds. Each burst of fire spat a storm of lead that could tear through armor, wings, and engines alike. But the Mustang was more than just firepower, it was finesse. With the Rolls-Royce Merlin under its sleek cowling, it climbed faster and flew higher than any German interceptor could match. Its drop tanks extended its range to over 1,600 miles, allowing it to chase the enemy deep into hostile skies and still come home. No longer limited by distance, it could strike anywhere, anytime. For Luftwaffe pilots, the war in the air had changed overnight. The once invincible Messerschmitt Bf-10-9s and Focke-Wulf 190s, symbols of German air supremacy, were suddenly being hunted. They'd spot a distant glint in the sky, a speck growing larger by the second, and know what it meant. Death was coming at 400 miles per hour. Dogfights that had once been contests of equals became massacres. The Mustang's stability and high-speed control allowed it to dive like a meteor and pull out with surgical precision. German pilots tried to climb away, but the Mustang followed. They tried to dive, but the Mustang stayed on their tail. It could escort bombers in the morning, strafe trains at noon, and duel with aces by dusk, and still have fuel to spare. The Allies had finally built a perfect balance of speed, power, and endurance, a sky juggernaut. From the frozen airfields of England to the skies over the Reich, the Mustang became both shield and sword. It wasn't just protecting bombers anymore, it was destroying the Luftwaffe, one dogfight at a time. And above the clouds, where sunlight glinted off the gun barrels and vapor trails twisted like scars across the heavens, even the proudest German ace learned to recognize that silhouette. The unmistakable wings of the Mustang, the hunter of hunters. The P-51 Mustang was a masterpiece of engineering, but it was the men in the cockpit who made it legendary. Behind every gleaming fuselage stood a pilot with ice in his veins and fire in his heart. They were young, many barely in their 20s, yet they carried the weight of entire bomber crews on their shoulders. When they climbed into the Mustang's tight cockpit and slid the canopy shut, it wasn't just a machine they commanded. It was a living extension of their instincts, a partner in survival. Among them was Captain Chuck Yeager, a farm boy from West Virginia with nerves of steel and eyes sharp as an eagle's. He was known for his calm under fire, his precision flying, and an unshakable confidence that bordered on fearlessness. Yeager's Mustang, nicknamed Glamorous Glenn, became the terror of the Luftwaffe. His encounters were clean, efficient, and ruthless. One moment he was invisible, the next his guns roared and another enemy aircraft spiraled into the earth. Then there was Clarence Bud Anderson, Jaeger's close friend and wingman. A natural tactician, Anderson's philosophy was simple: stay alive, stay sharp, and protect your wingman. His Mustang, Old Crow, became one of the most recognized fighters in the European theater. Anderson flew 116 missions without being hit once, a testament not only to his skill, but to his respect for the machine and the men around him. And of course, Colonel John Kit Carson, whose leadership and killer instinct turned him into a symbol of American air power. Carson led his squadrons deep into enemy skies, always leading from the front, never asking a man to take a risk he wouldn't take himself. To his men, he wasn't just a commander, he was a legend in the making. These pilots didn't just fly the Mustang, they danced with it. The way they banked through clouds, rolled into dives, and fired at the perfect second, it was precision and poetry combined. Every dogfight was a deadly performance where a heartbeat or a hesitation could mean death. And through it all, they formed an unbreakable brotherhood. Over the radio, amidst the chaos of flak and tracer fire, they called out to one another, not with fear, but with faith. "I've got your tail, bud." "He's breaking left, Jaeger, take him." They fought not just for victory, but for each other. The P-51 may have been forged in factories, but its soul came from these men. In their hands, it became more than a fighter. It became a statement of courage, ingenuity, and defiance. They proved that true power isn't just built, it's flown. By 1944, the European sky had become a vast, deadly arena. From the beaches of Normandy to the smoldering ruins of Berlin, the P-51 Mustang reigned supreme. But it wasn't uncontested. Facing them were the Luftwaffe's finest, battle-hardened aces like Adolf Galland, Erich Hartmann, and Walter Nowotny, men who had cut their teeth over the Eastern Front and carried reputations as living legends. But even legends could bleed. The duels that followed were unlike anything seen before. 10,000 feet above the earth, amidst vapor trails and the thunder of engines, these fights were not chaos, they were art. A dance of death measured in milliseconds and meters. One wrong move, one overpull of the stick, and the sky became a grave. The Mustang's advantage was not just speed, it was control. With its laminar flow wing and Merlin engine, it could climb, dive, and roll with surgical precision. A skilled pilot could twist it into impossible maneuvers, bleeding speed in an instant, then accelerating like a bullet. The Germans, accustomed to dictating the terms of combat, suddenly found themselves reacting instead of attacking. Galland himself would later admit, "The Mustang was the best all-around fighter of the war. It could do everything, and do it well." Coming from the Luftwaffe's own general of fighters, that was no small confession. Even Hartmann, the Black Devil with over 350 kills, learned to respect the Mustang's reach. He warned his men to never engage one unless they held the advantage. High above France, duels began that could last minutes or mere seconds. A burst of tracers would light the sky, and then silence. A black plume of smoke would fall earthward, marking the end of another ace's career. For the men inside those cockpits, time slowed to the rhythm of heartbeats and gunfire. Each Mustang pilot knew the stakes: protect the bombers, survive the mission, and make it home. For the Germans, it was the defense of their homeland, their skies. For both, it was personal. These were not machines clashing. They were wills, dreams, and instincts colliding in the cold air. By the time the Allies reached Berlin, the duels had become fewer. Not because the Luftwaffe grew stronger, but because there were so few German fighters left to rise against them. The once feared eagles of the Reich had been grounded, their wings clipped by the relentless little friends that now roamed the skies with impunity. And so, in those final duels above the clouds, the outcome of the air war was sealed. Not by sheer numbers, but by the men who dared to climb higher, fly faster, and face death head-on. By mid-1944, the once mighty Luftwaffe was collapsing under the relentless pressure of Allied air power. Every day, the roar of engines thundered over Europe. Massive bomber formations stretching for miles, their silver bellies glinting in the sun. And above, weaving protectively around them, were the P-51 Mustangs, the little friends who had become the executioners of the Third Reich's Air Force. Before the Mustang, each deep strike into Germany was a gamble. Bombers went in heavy and slow, braving waves of interceptors and walls of flak, often returning home with shredded wings and empty seats. But now, with P-51s riding shotgun all the way to Berlin and back, the odds had shifted decisively. The Merlin-powered Mustangs had range, speed, and lethal intent. They didn't just escort bombers, they hunted. Their missions no longer ended when the bombers dropped their loads. They followed the Luftwaffe home. Airfields across France and Germany burned as Mustangs strafed runways, destroyed fuel depots, and caught enemy fighters before they could even take off. For the Luftwaffe, it was death by exhaustion. Veteran pilots were gone, shot down or captured, and their replacements, barely trained boys, were sent into hopeless dogfights. The sky that once belonged to Germany now belonged to the Allies. Every factory, rail line, and oil refinery was within reach. Hitler's war machine, starved of fuel and protection, began to suffocate. Mustang pilots could feel the shift. Missions that once seemed suicidal became near routine. They still faced danger, flak, weather, and the occasional desperate German ace. But the fear had changed sides. The hunters had become the hunted. Even General Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe, reportedly confessed, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the war was lost." By the end of 1944, Allied bombers were striking the very heart of the Reich. Factories in Munich, refineries in Leipzig, rail yards in Dresden. And they came home, day after day, escorted by squadrons of P-51s gliding through the upper atmosphere like steel angels. The tide had turned not with a single battle, but with the steady hum of thousands of Merlin engines. The Mustang had delivered what the Allies had dreamed of since the war began: total air superiority. From that moment forward, the road to victory stretched wide open across the skies of Europe. As the smoke of World War II cleared, a new sound began to echo across airfields. Not the deep growl of piston engines, but the sharp, piercing scream of jets. The world was changing, and the P-51 Mustang, the undisputed king of propeller-driven flight, now faced an enemy it could never outfly: time. In the final months of the war, German engineers had already unveiled a glimpse of the future. The Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet fighter. Sleek, fast, and futuristic, it could fly nearly 200 miles per hour faster than any Mustang. For a moment, the balance wavered. But the Me 262 came too late. Its numbers were few, its pilots inexperienced, and its skies already dominated by the P-51. Mustangs learned to catch them where they were weakest, on takeoff and landing, and even this revolutionary aircraft couldn't change the tide. Yet the writing was on the wall. The age of propellers was ending. As peace returned, many Mustangs were mothballed, sold, or scrapped for metal, but the legend refused to die. When war erupted again, this time over the Korean Peninsula, the Mustang was called back to service. Renamed the F-51, it flew once more, not as a high-altitude dogfighter, but as a rugged, low-level ground attacker. While the new jet-powered F-86 Sabres clashed with Soviet MiG-15 high above, the old Mustang roared through valleys and mountains, strafing enemy columns and protecting UN troops on the ground. In Korea, the Mustang showed it still had teeth. Pilots loved its range, its toughness, and the precision of its guns. Against all odds, the same aircraft that had hunted Messerschmitts over Berlin was now dropping bombs and rockets over Pyongyang, a living relic, still shaping the outcome of modern warfare. Even as jet technology advanced, the P-51 remained a favorite among aviators. Civilian racers modified it into speed demons for post-war air competitions. Others found homes in the skies of smaller nations, serving in air forces across the world, well into the 1960s. The Mustang story wasn't just about victory, it was about endurance. It bridged two eras, from the golden age of propeller flight to the dawn of the jet age. Where most machines became obsolete overnight, the Mustang adapted, survived, and kept flying. It was no longer the fastest thing in the sky, but it had already carved its name into history. The jet age might have arrived, but the Mustang would forever remain the symbol of the skies it once ruled. Decades have passed since the Mustang's roar echoed across the skies of Europe, yet its legend still soars, untouched, undimmed, unforgettable. The P-51 wasn't just a machine of war. It was a masterpiece of purpose and design, born from desperation and perfected through courage. It symbolized a moment when human ingenuity and raw determination fused into something greater than the sum of its parts. Now, to the bomber crews who once watched their friends vanish in smoke over Germany, the arrival of the P-51 was nothing short of salvation. Through the freezing altitudes and black flak clouds, they'd peer through their gun turrets and see the sleek silver silhouette sliding into formation, wingtip to wingtip with their bombers. Over the radio came the words they longed to hear. "Don't worry, fellas, we've got your backs." From that moment, every Allied airman knew they weren't flying alone. For the men inside those Mustangs, the bond went both ways. They called themselves escorts, but they were more like guardians, risking everything to shield those slow, vulnerable giants that carried the weight of the war on their wings. Every time a Mustang pilot turned into an oncoming swarm of German fighters, it was a choice to protect others before themselves. Many never came home, but for every bomber crew that did, Little Friend wasn't just a nickname. It was a prayer answered. Today, restored Mustangs still slice through the sky at air shows, their Merlin engines singing the same haunting song that once filled the battlefronts of Europe. Veterans, now old and frail, still look up when they hear that sound. And for a heartbeat, they're back in 1944, watching their little friends appear through the clouds once more. The Mustang's legacy is eternal. It defined not only a generation of pilots, but an era of innovation and unity. It proved that victory wasn't just about firepower, it was about endurance, teamwork, and the will to fight for something greater than oneself. In museums and memorials across the world, its polished metal gleams beneath soft lights, a silent reminder of the courage that once ruled the skies. And though the world has moved into the age of stealth and supersonic flight, no aircraft has ever carried the same spirit. The P-51 Mustang will forever remain what it always was: fast, fearless, and faithful. A little friend to those who needed one most. And a legend to all who remember. If you enjoyed this journey through history, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss another story from the skies.